When I reread the book when I was an adult, when I was 30, when I came back to the text, I was shocked by how much of it was so incredibly modern and felt like it could have been written yesterday and was just flying off the page. It felt like it was all written in neon.
Greta Gerwig's revisioning of Little Women was one of the most beloved films of 2019. By now you might have heard about the poignancy of the dual timelines, or how the ending was changed to incorporate the author's desire for Jo to remain a literary spinster, or even how the lack of bonnets is an abomination. Restructuring the two books redirects attention to themes of the marriage problem which can be applied to the 1860s and to the present day. But on my first watch there were some scenes which it felt painfully obvious we weren't listening to the thoughts and feelings from young women brought up in the 1860s. Instead, we are hearing Greta Gerwig expressing her feminist stance on women's history and gender expectations. And these two aspects of the film got me thinking, what can Little Women 2019 teach us about dramatising the past on film?
The way the book was written, it was written in two books. In the first book, which is the childhood part, which is what I think people think of when they think of Little Women. And then the second book is the adult part, 8 years later. And they're really twins and they're companions. And I found as I started looking at the chapters that you could graft them almost one on top of the other. And they're like the adult answer to what had happened in childhood. And I thought there was just something incredibly poignant about it.
The Little Women book and its sequel Good Wives take place over many years, which could cause problems when packing all of that into a 2-hour film. The 2019 version tackles this issue by structuring the story as two parallel timelines, marked by the rosy tones of childhood and the austere tones of being an adult. Jo is facing a transformative time in her life, she's hitting a turning point in her writing career, she's deciding who to marry and if she should marry at all, and most crucially her favourite younger sister Beth has become very ill. To help her navigate these big changes, she reflects on her life, and when she travels back to her family home, there are reminders all around her.
So what I wanted to do was start the film I was making grounded in adulthood so that I could squarely center on this question of authorship, and particularly Jo March / Louisa May Alcott's authorship, and start with her trying to sell a story, and then go back and be able to create this tension when we see childhood is of that kind of idea of is that what happened or is that what you remember? Or is that what happened or is that how you wrote it down?
This restructuring brings out the themes of the imperfect nature of memory. Remembering, or rather misremembering history is a recurring theme in relatively recent and usually postmodern historical fiction. In Atonement, Bryony, who like Jo is the supposed author of the text, acts as historian who writes about her family in the 1930s and 1940s with a disproportionate level of control over how the story is presented. This disproportional amount of control ultimately leads to tragedy. Greta Gerwig's Little Women has a less drastic message about history and memory. It takes our childhood memories of the book and the many film adaptations and links them with the characters' childhood memories of the events in Little Women, and then it asks, what do the things we draw from our imperfect memory say about us in the present? One academic identifies the book and the film's use of Beethoven's piano pieces as a microcosm for how Gerwig's changes to the original text work in this adaptation. In the book, Laurie plays music to express emotions he can't put into words after Jo's rejection of his marriage proposal. In the film, Bear plays the same piece to pay tribute to Beth and to connect his love for Jo with her love for her family. The simple change is how Gerwig adapts the book's core theme of families and communities coming together. He says, Gerwig, in manipulating narrative time, foregrounds how one's interpretation of the very same music, words and images is inflected by context. This process reenacts how we approach the film as an adaptation. Our familiarity with the source material and with Beethoven would shape how we understand it. The film's non-linear structure questions how much of the childhood storyline is real and how much of it is Jo's imperfect memory or perhaps the rosy version she painted for her book. By extension, we might ask how much of our cultural recollections of the past or nostalgia for Little Women are grounded in reality, and how much of it is a rosy, idealised version. While making the film, the cast visited the place where Louisa May Alcott grew up, Orchard House. The production team worked closely with Orchard House to portray the setting and characters as best they could. There are sprinkles of this real context, like Amy's paintings on the walls that reflect one of the real sisters' artistic decorations. The accuracy of the costume, settings and dialogue is a whole different story, but it seems like the insights of the Orchard House historians found their way into the final project.
Mr. Alcott gave his daughter a wonderful sense of agency by building her that desk. Her mother gave her a pen with a note that said, "May this pen your muse inspire when wrapped in pure poetic fire," again giving her daughter agency.
The film stresses a crucial point to this context, that Jo and Alcott's agencies as writers had to be navigated within concepts of 19th century ideal womanhood. Once the film's structure has destabilized our ideas and memories about the 1860s and the original books, the story delves into historical themes and debates that audiences might not have considered in conjunction with Little Women, readdressing what our childhood readings or our nostalgia might have missed about the historical context. The most pressing of these historical themes is, of course, the marriage problem. The final scenes of the Little Women film interweave two moments: Jo's sudden revelation that she loves Bear and their declaration of love in the rain, which is the ending from the book, and then with Jo's negotiation with her publisher, which concludes with the publisher requesting a change in the ending but Jo retaining the copyright. It is implied that the rosy filter over the umbrella scene is actually the edited ending written after Jo has sold the book, while in reality Jo lives her life as a literary spinster, just as Louisa May Alcott did herself, and which she wished for her literary self-insert heroine. The question is who or if Jo should marry. This is a big point of debate among fans. Should she have ended up with Laurie or Bear? And was it better for Amy or Jo to marry Laurie? And then there is also the question of if Jo should have married at all. Like all fandoms, the discussion can get pretty charged. With the twin endings of Jo marrying or publishing her book, the film latches onto these emotive discussions to add its interpretation of the marriage question.
Women, they have minds. And they have souls, as well as just hearts. And they've got ambition, and they've got talent, as well as just beauty. And I'm so sick of people saying that love is just all a woman is fit for. I'm so sick of it. But I'm so lonely.
After saying no to Laurie and saying that she might stay single, suddenly Jo is telling us she wants to be with someone so she can stop being lonely. But what Jo is really saying is that she misses the family of her childhood and she wants to be part of that again, and at that moment marriage seems like the way to achieve that. This moment acknowledges that marriage originates from a positive experience but has been hijacked by patriarchal society and the suppression of women's rights to make it something restrictive and limiting.
And that's sort of the way I approached it, married or dead. That's what you've got to do with female characters, because if they're not married and they're not dead, God knows what they're going to do. It's going to be a mess. So what I was trying to set out to do was saying, well, I told you at the top, married or dead. That's the rules. And then you got Jo and you're like, well, what's it going to be?
The writing brings themes of patriarchy, marriage and money into the main light, and the actors' emotive performances turn these themes into something heartbreaking, poignant and even humorous. Audiences may leave the film arguing about whether it was better for Jo to marry or remain single. In this way, the adaptation plays with the book's actual ending and the author's supposed intended ending to provoke thought and discussion about what would be best for the characters according to the available options to women at the time. Certainly, audiences are not only engaging with the character story arcs but with theories about women's history. The way Gerwig achieves this response is partly through something that is referred to as the role of affect. Affect refers to emotional engagement, and in the case of historical fiction, film can teach viewers about the past using emotional involvement. Alison Landsberg claims that the potential of film to represent and produce knowledge about the past is primarily to do with the way the medium produces and transmits affect. This might be done through the film's special ability to access another person's mind and motivations who may have had very different life experiences, convictions, and commitments. Or it could be through historical films' attempts to recreate the conditions of life which might have been dictated by laws, customs, values, social morals, or political and economic circumstances. In other words, Little Women 2019 uses the filmmaking technique of two timelines filtered through different lenses to present the themes of imperfect memories or nostalgia that really tugs at our hearts and will probably make us shed a few tears. And then, according to the notion of affect, this emotional engagement is how the film transmits its interpretations and knowledge about the past. After being presented split tones of childhood and adulthood, we really feel the fullness of 19th century gender expectations and the weight of decisions about marriage and the limited options women had to make money. This helps us to contextualize Amy's ambition to marry rich and Jo's decision to change her book's ending. And this emotional conveying of messages about the past is what really sticks in our heads after the film is finished. After all, most people are far more likely to remember the emotional beats of a storyline than the historically inconsistent skirt silhouettes.
I wanted to include that in the movie because I kept talking about it to people. It was like, you have no idea. She was so interesting. She kept the copyright. She was this amazing woman. She was so funny. And then suddenly I was like, why don't I put all this in the movie? This is worth having as part of the story because it is part of the story.
There is an idea that historical fiction has the ultimate goal to inspire interest in the period and to encourage further research so audiences learn more about the real history behind the story. I'm not sure this view holds up because realistically most people will get on with their lives without carrying out further research into every historical film they watch. And there are plenty of others who may take the film at face value and consider it to be how it really was during that time. In this regard, I think Greta does something new and exciting with Little Women. She inserts historical context into the story and makes it almost impossible not to engage with debates about women's history. She also creates a motivation to learn more about the period beyond simply being inspired after liking the story. She almost makes it a necessity to learn about the historical context of women in the 19th century and Louisa May Alcott's life so that the film can be understood to the fullest. The 2019 version has found an interesting way to make use of storytelling techniques unique to film so it can present an interpretation about the past, that marriage in the 19th century was about money as much as it was about romance, and that Louisa May Alcott was forced to make compromises so she could get her work out there. The message for viewers then is that stories about young women are important, their voices should be heard, and there are still similar obstacles to overcome for women today. Overall, this is intended to be empowering and inspiring to a new generation of Little Women. This type of engagement with historical debates is arguably the ideal outcome for any historical film. When has there been another time when the economic history of women and marriage was pushed to the forefront of public consciousness? So far, it seems like Little Women 2019 does an excellent job of presenting the lives of women in the 1860s to a wide audience. Its use of story structure and emotional engagement to convey interpretations about the past is inventive and effective. It could be said that other historical filmmakers could learn a thing or two from this adaptation when deciding how best to present the past. The problem, however, is that Greta Gerwig's Little Women is a bit too effective at conveying its claims about the past. In its efforts to get across the economic position of women, it at times overemphasizes similar contexts while neglecting others. This might skew audiences' knowledge of the past in favour of one historical debate. So is this film an innovative way to pay homage to the author's true intentions that her restrictive 19th century context denied her? Or is it a disservice to the character's story arcs in pursuit of a feminist spin?
For me, I always heard it as a modern story. For me, it never felt dusty. It always felt like I could hear it clear as a bell.
She would say, I can't believe this. I'm actually going back to the text to use her exact words because it's so modern.
As part of her writing process, Gerwig read through the original text and lifted lines that she thought were the most modern. Whether she means modern in the sense that the book is ahead of its time or in the sense that it's speaking about universal experiences, we can see the film reinterpreting classic lines in a fast-paced, talkative form that refreshes the lengthy prose. An unintentional side effect is that in the attempt to find the lines most palatable for modern audiences, the lines that are harder to grasp are ignored. Yes, ambitious girls have a hard time, I've been angry almost my entire life, and Christmas isn't Christmas without presents could all be considered relatable statements. But what about Amy's advice that women should be agreeable? Or Meg's breakdown when she spends all day failing to make jam, which means dinner isn't ready for her husband when he gets home? The search for the modern not only removes context about gender and marriage, but it also cannot grapple with the intentions of the book and especially the conventions of children's literature at the time. Over the 19th century, there was a boom in print culture which included an increase in the availability of children's books. They didn't want to put any old rubbish into children's hands, but they were intentional in the messages and behaviours these books promoted. Many children's books were morality tales. You can see this with Little Women as, although there is an overarching plot, the narrative functions as individual moments in the girls' lives as they make mistakes and learn lessons about how to be better people. When Amy is punished for bringing contraband limes to school, Marmee is critical of the school's punishment but also tells Amy that she shouldn't break rules just to be like the other girls. When Jo and Amy's argument almost ends in tragedy, Jo learns she needs to control her temper. When Meg wears borrowed extravagant clothes to a ball only to be ridiculed and to feel self-conscious, she learns she must be content with what she already has. As Beth is the precious sister, both in book and in real life, her lesson is that she needs to speak up and believe in her abilities so that she can play on a wonderful piano and hone her talents. The message to the young audience is that they should be calm, content, avoid giving in to peer pressure, and should be sure of themselves. They should be good people, but they should be good within the framework of ideal womanhood at the time. If the film wishes to delve into the relationship between the writer of the book and the writing in the book, an important aspect to acknowledge is the conventions of writing at that time. In other adaptations, it's easy to gloss over how the book originally fitted into the marketplace. But in this adaptation, failing to engage with the wider publication context leaves open unanswered questions, or worse, assumed answered questions. Further, the quest to find the modern in the old language can lead to a dichotomous view of the past that doesn't reflect the reality and can leave audiences with a false sense of knowledge. To illustrate this, I'm going to deep dive into two of the most memorable scenes in the film. First, Amy's explanation to Laurie that marriage is an economic proposition, and second, Joel's dual endings.
And as a woman, there's no way for me to make my own money. Not enough to earn a living or to support my family. And if I had my own money, which I don't, that money would belong to my husband the moment we got married. And if we had children, they would be his, not mine. They would be his property. So don't sit there and tell me that marriage isn't an economic proposition, because it is. It may not be for you, but it most certainly is for me.
When Amy speaks here, it's impossible for me to see Amy March, 1860s girl, talking to a childhood friend. This is a very cynical perspective on marriage that I'm not convinced Amy would have had the maturity of thought to hold. Amy isn't a 19th century woman here, but Greta Gerwig speaking her views through the character of Amy.
So the line, "I've always known I would marry rich," that's from the text. She does say that. And later she feels sort of embarrassed about actually having said that. But this speech, actually, for the most part, it comes from a conversation I had with Meryl Streep about this movie, which she essentially said to me, the thing that you have to make the audience understand is it's not just that women couldn't vote. It's not just that they couldn't own property. They couldn't. It's that they didn't own anything, and that they legally couldn't unless they were, completely unmarried and had their own fortune. But even then, it was complicated. They couldn't get educated.
The concept of coverture has been a hot topic for a long time in women's history and feminist revisions of history. It's sort of the leading thing to point at from the past and say, look at that terrible patriarchy. So it doesn't surprise me that it creeps into an adaptation of a book that is literally called Good Wives.
I knew I wanted Amy to have a speech like this, but actually this particular speech I wrote 10 minutes before we shot. Hearing Amy say, "I want to marry rich," sounds quite crass if you don't really understand the stakes of what that means. Yeah. For women at that time, it was the decision. And if you married the wrong person, if you married someone who had a drinking problem or couldn't make a living or treated your children badly, that's it. That's the worst decision you could make. So in any case, I wanted to give her context.
Amy's speech unfortunately just doesn't seem to be the way women from this time would speak about marriage or how they might conceptualize it. Millicent Fawcett was an educated and influential suffragist who was informed of women's position during this time. After her purse was stolen, she went to court for the thief's trial, where she was shocked and hurt to find her purse referred to as her husband's property. She later used this experience to fuel her suffragist mission about the struggles of women. But the point is, even she didn't always consider coverture in her everyday life until she was confronted by the legal reality. Amy March, who at this point is still young and has spent most of her childhood painting pictures and playing with her sisters, is unlikely, I think, to understand and articulate the full scope of women's position under the law. She would perhaps be more likely to understand it on a personal relationship level, similar to today. At most, she would maybe articulate it along the lines of how people reacted to the change from the familiar marriage to the romantic marriage over the 19th century, as how Talia Schafer explains here in regard to the Little Women book. In the book, there is one direct reference to marriage being one of the few ways for women to make money, but most of the focus is on the sisters trying to make good marriage choices for themselves. Then there is Marmie's advice to Meg on what good wives should be like, which is backed up by the girls' morality lessons throughout the two books. The reason Amy feels upset and remorseful after hinting she wants to marry for money is that they have been brought up to value simplicity and generosity. It's her old vice of worldliness coming for her again, and to be a good character in this children's morality tale, she needs to dispel it. I'm not sure these moments would make it through Greta Gerwig's modern checklist, But nonetheless, it's part of the text and it's part of the context, and I can't help thinking that the directness of Amy's speech is both anachronistic and portrays an overly simplistic view on the varied ways people existed within the legal theory and the social practice of marriage.
Make it short and spicy. And if the main character is a girl, make sure she's married by the end. Or dead, either way.
Excuse me?
We know that Jo here is a stand-in for Louisa May Alcott, and the implication is that Alcott had to go through a similar conversation from a similar chauvinistic publisher. But we don't know how this conversation actually went down, and it is unlikely that it happened in the same way as presented in the film. Little Women was not Louisa May Alcott's original idea. It was proposed by her publisher, who thought a story for young girls would sell well. Louisa disagreed it would be popular, but still she wrote a book drawing from her own life, experiences and family. This publication context shows that Little Women was always a collaborative process with the publisher, and that Louisa followed at least partly her publisher's recommendations for what would sell well. Louisa May Alcott then wrote more books in the Little Women series, Little Men and Jo's Boys. The sequels present an optimistic look at Jo's married life, where she opens a school with Bear, becomes a mother and has a successful career as a famous writer. In this optimistic world, Jo never has to choose between marriage and her career. It is not Gerwig's invention that Jo writes the story of her family. In the final book, Jo's Boys, Jo receives a request from her publisher. We know Louisa May Alcott received a similar request which she fulfilled with a similar speed. She was known to write for all hours, and she wrote the first Little Women book in just a few months. Then she was surprised to find her book of jolly tales had made her one of the most financially successful writers in the country. Of course, Louisa May Alcott never married in real life, but she also made her fortune from writing books about Jo's personality and marriage, even if she wasn't the most keen on writing moral tales for children. Alcott gives Jo's authorial voice a presence in the narrative, and this creates two parallel perspectives, the character Jo as written in the story, and the writer Jo who makes commentaries on the action. This writer Jo soothes character Jo's quarter-life crisis, and takes a lengthy digression about why everyone should respect old maids. Writer Jo also betrays that she doesn't believe Good Wives concludes on such a high that character Jo does. I do think families are the most beautiful things in the world, exclaims character Jo, but writer Jo dampens his optimism by saying character Jo was in an unusually uplifted frame of mind just then. This framing device gives Alcott a way to comment on the story and communicate some of her views, even as she makes compromises for her publisher and her audience. She even uses this writing technique to add complexity and realism to the children's morality tale genre. The 2019 film's assertion that it is giving Louisa May Alcott the ending she would have wanted distracts from the fact that this ending is kind of already baked into the text. Moreover, portraying Alcott as a poor literary victim forced to write according to her chauvinistic publisher's wishes takes away some credit from her position as a talented writer. Structuring the whole film around Jo having to change the ending of her book unintentionally removes Alcott's agency as a professional and successful writer. It disallows respect for Alcott's writing choices, and it doesn't let the book breathe within its 19th century context. It also kind of removes consideration for other reasons why she might have wanted to include Jo's marriage to Bear. In one of Alcott's letters, she indeed says she wants Jo to remain a literary spinster, despite her publisher's request for the opposite, and it sounds like she holds some resentment towards this expectation. But she also mentions the role her fans played in influencing the ending. Laurie and Jo is still a huge ship, and many original fans wrote to ask if the pair would marry, and so the pressure was on to find Jo's other half. We don't know how much Louisa May Alcott's publisher influenced the book's ending compared to the fans. Perhaps Alcott wrote the ending to give advice to her young fans who, most likely many of whom would be close to making similar important decisions about married life like Jo. She gave Jo a funny match with Professor Bear, and this decision has made generations of readers debate whether it was a good one. Laurie is more of a childlike friend and a bit of a troll, while Bear is Jo's intellectual equal. Alternatively, Bear turns up out of nowhere and is many years older, while Jo and Laurie have known each other for years. Whatever your opinion, it gets readers thinking about what they think are important factors in a marriage. Maybe the message here is that there are all kinds of different relationships and it's possible to find the right one for you. The line, "I rather enjoy the prospect," suggests she was satisfied with how her ending subverts expectations and she was ready and waiting for her readers to be challenged by it. There is a glimmer of this context when the film shows it was the publisher's children who convinced him the book might sell well. They find Jo's manuscript and run in demanding to know what happens next. But ultimately, in the 2019 adaptation, the publisher is the one who decides if the book is published and what changes are made. Portraying everything as the fault of the publisher removes the perspective of the book's original target audience, and it doesn't consider the other reasons Alcott may have had for Jo's marriage. It is also possible that Jo is not a direct stand-in for Louisa May Alcott, but rather an amalgamation of many people from her life. The letter where Alcott explains that her publisher and fans were all clamouring for Jo to walk the aisle was sent to a friend called Elizabeth Powell. Elizabeth was nearly a decade younger than Louisa, but she was already on the way to becoming an abolition activist and an education reformer. She was in favour of girls and boys being educated together and later became a gymnastics instructor at Vassar College, the first university for women in the US. When she married, she continued with her activism and eventually became the dean of Swarthmore College. Does this sound a little familiar? Treating Jo as a direct copy of Louisa May Alcott and her publishing experience is kind of misleading because there are differences between the two. In the film, Little Women seems to be Jo's seminal work where she finally gains financial independence while showing the world that the stories of young girls are important. The film gives the impression that this was the same for Louisa May Alcott. While this is true to an extent, it's also true that Louisa was struggling all her career between writing something commercial and writing something that made her feel intellectually fulfilled. Something she wrote at her publisher's request fits into the former. The 2019 adaptation makes it seem like it was a cut and dry mentality faced by every woman writer, married or dead. The reality was, as always, more varied. In her wider writings, Louisa wrote about being a spinster in a positive light. Here, Louisa wrote about the unmarried women she knew and all the things they were up to, while the payment for her writing sat beside her. Then she details in her journal all the things she plans to buy for the people in her life with the money. There was a space for literary spinsters even if the time wasn't quite ready for Jo to remain one. So, married or dead, that's what you've got to do with women, otherwise it will be a mess. The film gives an admirably strong interpretation about women writers and the obstacles they faced. But I can't help thinking that Greta Gerwig is constructing the publisher in a hyperbolic light that removes the intricacies and contradictions in how people viewed femininity in the 19th century. The publisher serves a very specific purpose in the film, and he's more of a plot device than a character. He isn't representative of how women writers may have been treated. In the book, the publishers don't speak to Jo in this way. As for Louisa's letter, well, there is only one instance that I'm aware of where she mentions pressure from her publisher to marry Jo. Louisa was writing to her radical Jo-like friend, and that might have affected her account of the situation. Like I said, we don't know the exact details of her relationship with her publisher, but we do know that the cut and dry married or dead attitude maybe wasn't as prevalent as the film suggests.
And I have a very specific idea of what it's about, and it's about women as artists, and it's about women and money. It's part of what the book is, it's just an aspect of it we haven't delved into.
It's ultimately a good thing that Gerwig pushed this historical perspective into the front of our cultural minds for a time, and the best books are the ones that are always reworked and redefined. But my biggest problem with the film is that it is just done far too heavy-handedly. The search for the modern and the subsequent erasure of the period voice prevents the characters from feeling like girls who are truly growing up in the 1860s. The hyper-focus on the metafiction aspect means that audiences are denied a richer picture of the 19th century attitude towards women, marriage, and women writers. Writing was actually one of the careers deemed appropriate for women. It could be undertaken in the home, and children's books especially could be seen as a way for women to give guidance to young readers. The blurring between Jo and Alcott also creates a false confidence in audiences who may assume this is exactly how the book's publishing story played out. Orchard House say that visitors often hold misconceptions about Louisa May Alcott's life, including what from the book was real and what was made up. In a way, Gerwig's film contributes to the myths around the Alcott family, where Alcott's agency as a children's writer is overshadowed by this fictional, dismissive and chauvinistic publisher. I do think Little Women 2019 was onto something with its dual timelines and metafictional elements, and this is an innovative way to bring some context into a historical film. By drawing attention to the relationship between the writing in the book and the writer of the book, the structure becomes almost a way to add footnotes to a medium that is impossible to provide footnotes. However, as is often the case, it isn't quite there, and I think its biggest strengths are also the causes of its biggest weaknesses. The film is so effective at portraying its themes about women, money and marriage and writing that it disproportionately exaggerates this theme in its representation of the past, and this buries wider themes and contexts. It also leaves audiences with a somewhat false sense of being informed about Louisa May Alcott's life, and it maybe misrepresents what 19th century people themselves thought about marriage within their own culture and upbringing. What Little Women 2019 teaches us about dramatizing the past is that emotional engagement can be paired with film techniques to present well-researched historical interpretations that audiences can apply to their own lives. But at the same time, there needs to be a way to include the other sides of the argument, whether through a choric character or as part of the plot. When re-watching the film, I began to wonder if the emotional climax had been misplaced. The film builds to these simultaneous scenes of Jo's confession of love and her book's publication. This is what frames the core themes and interpretations about life for 19th century women. But I think another scene maybe better encapsulates both the book and the film's shared themes.
It's just about our little life.
So?
Well, who will be interested in a story of domestic struggles and joys? It doesn't have any real importance, does it?
Maybe it doesn't seem important because people don't write about them.
No, writing doesn't confer importance, it reflects it.
I don't think so. Writing them will make them more important.
What both versions of Little Women unarguably share is that they are putting the voices and experiences of girls and women into a wider media full of male faces. Her writing gave Louisa May Alcott enough money to support her family, and it gave girls characters who they can relate to. The story continues to give girls characters to be inspired by, even as the March Sisters slip further into the past. And its continued popularity and many adaptations means that the story of growing up as a girl remains a point of discussion, nostalgia, and love.
And she did, by her bravery and by her artistry, pulled us into the 20th century and gave voice to countless women authors that I don't know if we'd have today. I don't know, because the women who talk about loving this book, the women of, you know, as kind of far-flung as Simone de Beauvoir, to Elena Ferrante, to J.K. Rowling, to Patti Smith, to Gloria Steinem. It's a lot of different kinds of women, and they all say, this is my book and Jo March is my girl. I don't know what would have happened if it hadn't been written. Maybe we wouldn't be where we are.